So hello and welcome to today's video. Cut content will always be a prominent thing in gaming. Often when it's shown off, many fans will think, that feature looks or sounds amazing and why did they cut it, and other similar comments. But sometimes that isn't the case, and features that got cut from one game might eventually end up being reused in a completely different game sometime down the line. And for today's video I'll show you 5 cut items from Buddy that ended up being used in future games instead. We'll start off quite simple with the black and white HUD, because one of the earliest ever known pictures of Buddy stems from former developer David Bynes' portfolio, which had a handful of very early UI and map designs. And in one of them is an actual screenshot, which shows off a very early mission failed screen. But there's way more to this image because it shows off the beta HUD. Now if you look to the bottom right, you'll see it, and it shows off a very different looking radar because it's a black and white minimap, which is such a stark contrast to the final version, which went for a similar colour design to that of GTA Vice City and GTA San Andreas instead. Now while it was scrapped from Buddy entirely, the black and white monochrome radar style would eventually be seen in the release of Grand Theft Auto 4, which came out a few years later, and it appears that the black and white radar scheme seems to be a bit of a mainstay in the GTA series, as it was reused for GTA 5's remaster starting with the PS4 and Xbox One, and was also seen in the GTA 6 leaked gameplay. So I think it's quite interesting to think that a staple of GTA's HUD design had originated from Buddy initially. The second item that was cut was also featured on that exact same screenshot I showed you just. If you look closely at it, some of you probably already noticed it, but mission failures and restarts, since here it's clear Buddy would have just paused the game and given you an option to either restart the mission or just unpause and continue. In the final game, you don't get this. If you fail a mission, excluding any boss fights, that's it. You have to toddle all the way back and restart from scratch. But here it looks like if you failed the mission and you were pretty deep into it, you could just restart it. Now this feature was somewhat introduced in GTA 4, where after dying you would get an in-game text asking you if you wanted to restart, but the Buddy version of this feature would be fully introduced in Red Dead Redemption, where upon a mission fail, the game would instantly pause, give you a big black screen with mission failed on it, and then ask you if you want to quit or restart. And this has since appeared in pretty much all of Rockstar's games ever since. It's appeared in GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, and even the butchered GTA Trilogy remasters. So it's safe to assume this will be an absolute mainstay in pretty much all the future Rockstar titles, and to think, this stemmed from being cut from Buddy initially. So the third item we're covering is Jimmy's beta style. Because as we know, during the course of any game's development, animations often get changed up pretty frequently, and in Buddy's case this rings true. Jimmy had a much different fighting style, both animation wise and control wise. The controls were more akin to that of the Warriors, and the entire style in general was just drastically different. Jimmy couldn't block everything automatically, and the moves were performed a bit more differently. Eventually, of course, this was changed to the one we know. I'd assume this was changed around 2005ish when Buddy first got delayed or something like that, but yeah. Jimmy's beta style that we're seeing now eventually saw use in the 2012 open world sandbox game Sleeping Dogs, where it's actually the default style used by the protagonist Wei Shen. Some of you may also notice that Sleeping Dogs is not a Rockstar game. And you're right, because it's from Square Enix. The real reason Jimmy's beta style found its way into a completely different company's game is because the person who animated Jimmy's original style, Satoru Yama, also worked on Sleeping Dogs. He worked on combat mechanics for both of the games. So it's very likely that once Jimmy's style got completely overhauled and replaced in Buddy, he decided to keep his work from Buddy for a future project, which just so happened to be Sleeping Dogs. So, as you know, in the third chapter of Buddy, when Bullworth gets coated over in blankets of snow, you can find loads of snowmen scattered around the academy grounds, and you can destroy them. Now during development, these snowmen were going to be a bit of an optional collectible, a bit like pumpkins were and tombstones are for Halloween, The only remains of this are a few text strings and unfinished reward strings, but that's it really. Smashing them all doesn't do anything, you don't get anything, you get the point. It's very possible this was scrapped because unlike the pumpkins and the tombstones where after Halloween they all get moved to a different location, where are you going to put snowmen? So I guess that's probably why it was cut. Anyway, this feature was eventually reused in Grand Theft Auto Online, introduced in the Christmas update for 2022, just over 16 years from Buddy's release. When Los Santos gets coated entirely in snow for Christmas, like they do pretty much every year since 2013, Rockstar added in a fresh collectible for free mode. You guessed it, Snowmen, where much like Buddy's cut feature, they're also a limited edition collectible where smashing them will generate you in-game money, and smashing them all would give you an 8-bit reward. And finally, the fifth feature, which I think is probably the most fun sounding one, so, the Fight Club. Because the basement where you fight Russell Northrop in his boss fight was going to see some use as a free mode activity where Jimmy could come down in the basement at any time and either bet or partake in fights himself. Sadly, there are very little leftovers of this. There's only a very tiny amount of them, and that includes, well, first of all the scenery itself, which has this weird boxer-style ring kind of design which doesn't even get used in the Russell fight. In fact, it's very highly assumed that the hole would be unlocked after chapter 1, where Jimmy could come down and partake in fights or whatever, but it seems there was much more to it than that. Because in the game files, once again there's only a very tiny handful of leftovers here, but there's only a few code strings which reference a bookie, coincidentally next to the ringside table, implying Jimmy could come visit the hole and engage in bets down here. It's unknown if the NPCs would be randomised or not, but either way it looks like this thing was scrapped very early on. Now the betting feature does see a little bit of use in the Freak Show where Jimmy can go and bet on 2 midgets. The Fight Club eventually saw its debut in Grand Theft Auto 4 The Ballad of Gay Tony, where it's better known as the LC Cage Fighters, where Luis Lopez can either come down here and partake in fights himself, or place bets on random fighters. It's introduced very early on into the story as well, as it's introduced in the mission Mama's Boy, where Luis goes with Santo to partake in this cage fighting kind of thing to pay off some of his mother's loan. But after that, Luis can come on down to the cage fighter whenever he wants and fight himself or bet on others or whatever, you get the point. So yeah, those are 5 cut features from Buddy that eventually saw use in completely different games. As you saw, some cut features from Buddy made their way into Red Dead Redemption, Grand Theft Auto and Sleeping Dogs. So who knows, maybe in the future we might see a cut feature from Buddy in Grand Theft Auto 6 or whatever. But yeah, that's it for today's video, thank you for watching and have a great day.